Welcome to the RealTea podcast, brought to you by Tennessee Realtors. I'm your host, Angela Shields. This podcast is created for Tennessee Realtors to get the tea on all things real estate in Tennessee. We'll bring you engaging conversations with esteemed guests in the real estate industry and cover a wide array of topics, including current events, governmental affairs, education, and legal updates. Welcome back to the RealTea podcast. We are extremely excited today because we've accomplished something major. We have got Matt and Addison Russell here together, and that is something we've been trying to do for a while.
It's funny that you think that's a major accomplishment because I feel like we're always together.
Not here.
But I guess not here. I know last time a session had started, and so he couldn't come because he was on the Hill. Now we have a little time.
We've had you here separately, and you both do a great job. You compete on who gets the best show, but today we're going to make it an excellent show because we have you together. For the audience who maybe has not tuned in, I want to make sure everybody is aware of who you are. So, Addison, I'll start with you. Addison Russell is not only our attorney, but our lobbyist. You both come from the same firm that is now rebranded to RFRS. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Want to make sure I do. But, and then Matt, of course, Matt Russell is also a lobbyist with government relations with the same firm. And both of you do a fantastic job for us. So we thank you for that. And thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks
Glad
for
to be
having
here.
us.
So I've asked you all the questions before about the tea. So we're going to skip right over that and just jump into it because we've got a lot to talk about. The legislature has wrapped for the year, and we have made some major accomplishments this year. So let's just talk about when you look across the year, what are some of those accomplishments? What have we done? And then we went silent.
What? We didn't do anything. No, I'm just kidding. We did so much. I think if you look at kind of realtor specific issues, and I know that for those that have been watching, we've been talking about them a lot, but one of the big bills we did this year as an organization was related to the vacation lodging service licenses, and saying that if you have an affiliate broker or principal broker license, you don't have to get this additional licensure to manage vacation lodging services, which is rentals for 14 days or less. And what that process looked like, it was an 8-hour class, and it was specific to just that one niche. Whereas, with their real estate license, you can do commercial real estate, residential real estate, property management. But if you wanted to do the short-term rental management, you had to have an additional licensure. So folding that in under the bigger license, but while keeping that smaller license intact for people that are only doing those activities, that's still an option. So that was something that we worked hard on this year to get done. And I think that our members will see kind of an immediate impact from that.
Especially those that are in markets like here in Nashville and Great Smoky and even Knoxville, some of those places where you see a lot of that short-term rental.
And I think that, you mentioned Great Smoky, and really that was where that licensure came from in the first place. The Smoky Mountains was doing short-term rentals before short-term rentals were cool.
Right.
But with the takeoff of a lot of platforms, it's really grown into a statewide industry. And so making it easier for real estate professionals to get into that space, I think will be helpful, but while maintaining consumer protection, That's true.
I think another few, obviously, bills that we passed, but more importantly, probably bills that we worked against. I think we constantly talk about it, but there were multiple impact fee bills up this year, multiple landlord registries. So, I think people often want to talk about the bills that, what are we working on? What are we pushing? But oftentimes playing that defense for the industry is probably, the vast majority of what we're accomplishing.
So many times I think about if you aren't there, we would have those impact fees, we would have those registries. And I think that's something that our members don't even think about because they're out selling real estate all the time. Who would be there if you weren't there to have those conversations, to talk about why those are not good ideas?
Right. And I think that's really what lobbying and advocacy is. And it's something that you learn, by being a part of that situation is things sound like a good idea. And then you need a voice to say, hey, here are the negative effects of this. Like a landlord registry to a lot of people sounds like a good idea. Like, okay, we need to have someone to call. That makes sense. But the impact of requiring that at a local level, especially if it comes with like a registration fee, it's just a mandate on these landlords, and you're de-incentivizing investment into our state. And that's something that we want to be aware of. And so just, trying to just spread the other side of that. And that's one example of how that works.
So, when you think about some of the other things that we've worked on, I know there's a lot of other things. Those are the issues that we deal with every year with the impact fees and the registries. But what are some of the other accomplishments that we had? I know that we talked a lot about affordable housing.
Yeah, and I was going to say, on the heels of government fees and why we oppose those, and that's to keep the cost of housing affordable. So some big things that we saw this year at the legislature. Governor Lee had proposed $30 million to go to THGA, and his initial vision was to create a starter home revolving loan fund, which we have talked about, and we were very supportive of that. But the $30 million stayed in, and it's going to THGA, and that's a huge amount of money, especially in the budget year that we just been in the budget cycle we've been in the past few years. But instead of the starter home revolving loan fund, they're actually putting that to a workforce housing grant program. And I think that will be really good. I'm really interested to see what comes out of that. It's specifically for workforce housing, and it lists like essential professions and occupations. It's not limited to those listed, but it's like we're trying to build housing that police officers want to live in, teachers want to live in, and it's going to hopefully incentivize local governments to develop those, then also providing these grants and these loan programs administered through THGA. And one requirement of the bill was that a project had to be in each grand division. So I think that that's something that we were very excited to see, the money go there and stay in the budget, and then to go to programs to try and create new and affordable, attainable housing.
Yeah, same thing. Housing affordability. We saw a low-income housing tax credit. Traditionally, where I guess previously, those tax credits were taxed by local assessors as a property tax. So there was a bill this year that took that, or it allowed the locals to not tax that as property tax. And a lot of people kind of gets down in the weeds of, well, why does that matter, right? Same thing that we talk about with landlord registries or impact fees. Anytime the government is putting any new fees or higher taxes on the cost of housing, it makes it more expensive for the end user. I think a lot of people say, well, these developers are making a lot of money. But I think we need to look at ways that we can incentivize developers to come in and do these projects. The numbers on low-income housing projects are already very tight. So when we're taxing something like that as a property tax, it only makes them even tighter, and probably disincentivize the developers from coming into those communities, right?
Sure.
So hopefully now with that bill that has been passed, we'll see local communities that will take advantage of that, and will encourage these developers to come into their local communities. And
we desperately need more developers in our communities because we don't have enough housing at all, especially for, like you said, the essential workers to be in our communities. So it's so important. So let's talk about the Regulatory Freedom Act. Can you tell me about that?
I can tell you that one is another one that gets really in the weeds, right? But a lot of people, when they think about government or they think about advocacy, they think about legislative session at Capitol Hill. But a lot of things get done kind of behind the scenes through rulemaking hearings, through through the departments that oversee a lot of our licensees. So at the end of the day, what the Regulatory Freedom Act is trying to accomplish is when these departments have these rules or these rulemaking hearings, that they are now, I think it has to cost more than $1 million, or an estimated cost of more than $1 million, that the department has to reach out to the pertinent associations or individuals that could be impacted. And they have to solicit now their information or their input on these rules. Obviously, if you're involved in the process when those rulemaking hearings are happening, you're able to kind of do that now. But this really just kind of puts the burden now on the departments rather than interested citizen groups or whoever may be having to know that these rulemaking hearings are coming down. Now the burden has shifted to the departments that are proposing the rules to reach out and say, hey, here's a rule we're proposing. It's clearly could have a huge fiscal impact on your association or your, affected industry. Give us your impact or give us your input. And I think, we've seen that at a federal level. They've attempted, I think it was called the REINS Act. They've tried that at the federal level. Tennessee is as one of a few states that have now implemented at the state level. But I do think while a lot of people may not see a immediate or direct impact on that, it really is a piece of legislation that long-term and really behind the scenes could have a huge impact on how a lot of people do business or really just maybe even outside of their professional lives on just other things that impact their lives of industries that may have more input on regulatory issues moving forward.
And I think for our members, the Real Estate Commission, most of their rules, and we follow those really well, don't have a significant financial impact like that. But if you look at the Department of Environment and Conservation, which is a lot of where your building development is happening, and those really do have the potential to come at great cost to a consumer. So it puts in, more protections of like, if it's going to have this economic impact, it's going to go through the fiscal review that the legislature controls, and like let's really nail down on this. And there are more safeguards in that regard. So I think that will be, I think that's good for any regulated profession in the state.
Well, and more information and transparency. Yeah, that also helps a lot. And then I understand we have the Community Workforce Housing Innovation Pilot Program. What can you tell me about that?
And that's a little bit of what I talked about, that money that's going to THGA. That'll be administered through THGA, and that was an initiative of Speaker Sexton. So I think that will be good for the workhouse and trying to get more products on the market through that program.
Just adding on that, I mean, we've heard obviously within our industry, right, a lot about affordable housing. But I think now it's awesome to see that the legislature is really taking solid steps to allocate money and to put framework in of how a plan like this could work. So it really, I think, should give a lot of people hope that, if this pilot can be successful and we work to see that expanded. But I think it's really good news that the legislature now is saying, hey, we acknowledge that affordable housing is an issue. Let's see how we can get government involved without having too much government in the problem. I think trying to find a way that government can assist but not do, right? I think it's very positive that we're seeing the legislature starting to.
Do you think we'll see a particular area they'll start with, or is it's still too new to tell anything?
I think that the conversation has been happening in very recent years. And I think that that's encouraging where you're hearing it as a buzzword. People are campaigning on it, and it's not just a buzzword, and it's not just a campaign thing,
right.
But I mean, I think they're really seeing the crisis that we have in Tennessee, especially being a place where people are moving to daily. We're getting new residents.
Companies coming.
New companies.
That need those houses.
Right. Which is great. And so I've been encouraged just by the uptick that it's been in conversation across the aisle. It's a very bipartisan issue.
And why wouldn't it be? I mean, housing is such a nonpartisan issue.
Yeah, everyone needs a house. That's like on your hierarchy of needs. Shelter is very important, and so we've seen it at the legislature the past few years. We saw it from the Lee administration, and so I think that that's just really positive. And where we've kind of gone in the past years at the state level is trying to incentivize local governments to do programs that will encourage development and not, as Matt said, put too much government in development, because usually that just really has the opposite effect. But I think looking at what we can do to incentivize it, and then the legislature has just been really receptive to our arguments about how fees do increase the cost of housing, and it hurts any affordable housing mechanisms. So they've been very receptive to those arguments, and that's why we've been successful in being able to stop a lot of those things. So I feel like the environment is just really good right now, and it's just a real opportunity to kind of come with things that can help the housing industry.
So we've had several members express interest in the selection of settlement agents and real property transaction. Can you elaborate on what this bill requires and prohibits in regard to sharing title insurance premiums, commissions, and other fees?
For sure. And I think that's quote unquote a messy issue, but just because the way it started was not the way it ended.
Yeah.
And the way, the legislative website isn't always the most consumer friendly. It's a great website. They do a really good job, but you have to know how to be like, oh, amended, adopted, and then go find the amendment and see what the final version was. So the way that bill started, and it's probably as many people kind of remember it, because we were opposed at the time when it was filed, was it was basically going to outlaw split closings. And those are very common in Middle Tennessee, more so than other parts of the state. And you had title attorneys on both sides of the issue with differing opinions. But we kind of thought that we got involved in opposing it, just, didn't really see the problem that it was seeking to address. I think the way that it ended this year actually does a good job of addressing a problem or, finding a solution. And the way the bill ended up was just that if you are doing a split closing and the title attorneys or the closing companies are splitting insurance premiums or commissions or any other fees that the buyer and seller are paying, they have to disclose that to the buyer and the seller. And they have to get written acknowledgement that the buyer and seller, it's not just like a unilateral disclosure. The buyer and seller have to sign off on it. So it ended up being a bill that really promotes transparency to consumers in real estate closings. And I think that I know that the title industry worked a lot on that. But I think that they got to a really good place. So we ended up being neutral on the bill. And that's really just all it ended up doing, was just requiring disclosure of that and promoting transparency in that regard.
And sometimes that comes from, like, you get to that point, it's from where you are able to educate those lawmakers it goes back to what you were saying, that your decisions having an impact here, or did you understand that when you wrote it this way, this is how it's going to be practiced, or what have you. And I love that about what you're doing when you're down there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, people hear when, and they may have a constituent or another interest group, and they're like, this is, we think this is wrong. And then you kind of have to say, look, but there are benefits to that. And then, there's no real harm, or however you need to frame it. But
I think one time I remember you saying that a lot of times when they come because somebody has come to them with a problem and they're trying to solve the problem. But again, it's they don't think through how their solution is being applied.
Definitely. I mean, that happens the regular.
That happens on the regular. And I think that bill is like a great example of like the legislative process, right? Somebody probably came to a member from West or East Tennessee, and maybe some title attorney came down from Middle Tennessee where it's common, and they were involved in a transaction. It was different to that part of the state. And then, they brought a bill, and the folks where it's common just said, hey, we do this all the time. It's not that big of a deal. Let's just disclose it, right? So a bill that started off that kind of had everybody on opposite sides really ended up just saying, well, think about the consumer here, and let's just let them know, right? Consumer has an issue with that, they can go elsewhere. So that's a kind of a great example of the legislative process.
Mm-hmm. There's some other things that were big that we did this year. So let's talk about the big initiative we have coming up in November.
Yeah, I think Yes on 2 is the state property tax prohibition. A lot of people know that obviously in Tennessee, we don't have a state property tax, but constitutionally they are allowed. So really at any given minute, as long as they're in session, I guess, a simple majority of the legislature, we could have a property tax by the end of that session. So this has been a multi-year, multi-session effort by Tennessee REALTORS and a few other groups that helped push that constitutional amendment onto the ballot. So it'll be on your ballot this November. And it is very important that folks get out and vote for it, because the way it's calculated is based off a percentage of the gubernatorial votes. So it's very important that our members get out and our members are help educating folks about that amendment, because we do want to make sure that we stay a no state property tax state. Obviously, I say state property tax because a lot of the misconception from some groups are that this would ban property tax completely, and this will change nothing for local governments that want to impose their property tax for their local services. But it is very important that we get out and we activate our members and everybody we know to vote yes on 2 in November.
This has been a very popular talking point for us, whether it's been we're talking to other states or we've been at the MIPM conference and talking to those interested in looking at Tennessee. They're very excited about that. Very excited. So I think it's very attractive.
It's huge for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Tennessee's attractive for a lot of reasons when it comes to business friendly.
Yes.
We ban the income tax. We've taken out the hall income tax. So really finishing it off with the state property tax could be a real big win for Tennessee.
Yes.
That's a big factor that keeps the cost of housing low, especially as we talk about like aging populations, and they're staying in their house and maybe their house is paid off. But then when you're paying your property taxes that are going up, especially as the demand here goes up, not having an extra tax makes a big difference for a lot of people.
I agree, 100%. Any other things that come to mind that you've accomplished this year, or the team has accomplished this year?
I think we talk about bills that passed and bills we stopped, but a lot of what it is also amending bills. We talked about the settlement agent bill that kind of became a totally different bill, but there were 2 other bills that come to mind that we were able to work with the sponsors to get amendments on. One of them was a bill by Senator Lamar and Representative Parkinson, and it was actually about recording of eviction proceedings. And this just really emanates everything we talked about today, that there were people in Memphis that were being evicted, and the person carrying out the eviction was recording it and then like putting it on TikTok and getting paid off of the views TikTok, but you're just watching people lose their home, and so they filed a bill that, hey, you can't record it, but where we came in we're like, obviously you shouldn't put it on TikTok, but there may be legitimate reasons why you want to record it, and for the safety of the property manager, for the safety of the landlord, if you need to share it with your attorney, if you need to give it to law enforcement. So we were able to work with the sponsors and get an amendment along with the apartment association who did really good work on that too, and put a list of people in the legislation that you can lawfully share these videos with, but it is not to the greater public.
Right. Not for entertainment.
Right. It's not for entertainment. It serves a legitimate purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was just an example of how these are real life situations, but they go beyond kind of the headlines. Another bill was the guns and apartments bill. That's kind of what I was referring to it as, but a bill that would allow tenants to keep firearms in their apartments, but also commercial buildings as well. And what we did there was just able to say, hey, okay, but there can't be civil liability on the landlord. So if someone was in an apartment building and the firearm discharged into their neighbors, that neighbor can't sue the property manager for allowing the firearm in the first place because it was state law. So we put in civil liability protections. And I think that those are just examples of like when you see things happening, protecting, the consumer, protecting our members and how we can get that done there.
And that is what you all do so well, is you're always looking at the consequences if the proper language doesn't get placed in these bills. And we appreciate that so much.
Register now for the annual Tennessee REALTORS Fall Conference. Join us in Memphis, Tennessee, September 21st to 24th for industry insights from engaging speakers, CE classes, networking events, and a whole lot of fun. Register before July 17th and take advantage of our early bird pricing. Don't wait. Register now. Visit tnrealtors.com.
So I brushed over it earlier, said that I thought you had looked at maybe 1,000 bills, but off the top of your head, how many bills have you really looked at this year?
I mean, every bill that's filed. So I think we're over the past 2 sessions, about 2,700-ish. So that's roughly 1,500 a session. And yeah, we get emails that have all the bills that have been filed that day, and both kind of just do a deep dive into them, looking at what titles they open up or like what they're relative to, and then reading them and flagging them for who may have an interest in them. So a lot of what we end up tracking for the realtors are just kind of like FYI, this kind of touches property rights, or, this could at a later date, but right now it doesn't do anything. And then what you nail down is hit those really more substantive ones.
There are some bills, obviously, just kind of off the top, you can say, well, not interested to us. But in Tennessee, we have the single caption rule. So a bill can only do what the caption says. And so obviously, if that caption's so off the wall or unrelated to us, you can, kind of probably not worry about it as much. But, for example, we could have something that said, relative to animals. Maybe we may not care about that, right? But it could then later say that, landlords have to do X, Y, or Z in relation to animals. And suddenly a bill that looked so unrelated to us is suddenly super important to us. And so, yeah, just really knowing what those captions and.
I feel like we had that happen one time with cows and the slaughter bill and things like that.
Oh my goodness, I
do
forgot about that bill.
I learned so much about slaughterhouses that year, and it was so funny. I feel like there were other bills that year too, but we kept being in the agriculture committee, and I was like, why am I in the agriculture committee like all session long? This is so weird. But yeah, I mean, it's
but you never know.
You never know. Like if you had just said, if it had been like relative to the slaughtering of cows, but then it ended up being a property rights issue that we got involved in. And
I think that was a great example of really how the state association can work with the local associations, right? If I remember that issue, it was something that probably statewide we didn't know about or didn't really care about per se. But then when that bill changed, I think it was a local association that said, we just had a really big issue with this locally, and this is how it impacts us. And so, yeah, that's a great example of a bill that we may not care about, and then suddenly you do.
Right. And then the other thing that, as we kind of are coming to the end of this, I think it's important that members understand that it's not you two that are deciding what bills we're following or what, or maybe not what we're following, but what we are really honing in on. There's a committee of members all across the state that you're bringing this information to.
Yeah, definitely. We are not that different from a real estate agent, honestly. Like, we can be your eyes and ears and mouthpiece, but it's the committee that, takes the positions and tells us why it's important or why it's not important. And then we just articulate that and communicate that as your agent, essentially. But that's, the committee is so important in that regard. They make those decisions. And then also like this, working with the staff here to get information from like, what does NAR have any resources on this? Are other states doing stuff? Or, communicating with the local GADs. Like you just said, that slaughterhouse bill was really important to one local association, or like they had just seen it and they had the knowledge. And so pulling everything to put in front of the committee so they can make that decision.
And usually when one association sees it, it's not long before another one will at some point.
Right.
So I asked you about the bills. How many meetings do you think you have a year? And I know that's going to be a tough question. And I'm talking about with the legislators.
The legislators. So we schedule meetings on 15-minute increments, if not smaller. And just all day you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. So I'd say the average day there are 20 meetings.
Yeah, probably.
A piece.
There could be, yeah, I know often throughout session, it's really, we just throw the meetings on our calendar, and it's just divide and
Or
conquer,
show up
and
together.
and figure out via text message who is going to get to that next meeting. When we started at the legislature as staffers, the legislative calendar was a little different. Both chambers went in at 5 o'clock on Monday. There was nothing on Monday afternoon. Our boss would come in probably around lunchtime. They went into caucus meetings, and they went in. But over the years, it really has adapted to now, 10 a.m. on Mondays, committee meetings are starting. You're meeting with legislators. So it really has gotten to where it is a lot busier down there. And a lot of that is they've become more efficient in the sense that they want to get out. At the end of the day, they're assistant legislature. They lose money to be down here. So they're ready to get back to their districts and see the people back home for sure.
I think those meetings can definitely give you whiplash, like especially for, we have a legislative intern every session. And so I feel like when they come to meetings with us, we could talk 3 or 4 issues on a variety of clients in like one 15-minute span. And I think sometimes they're like, wait, what? What are we talking about? Like there's not a lot of deep dive. That's why I think building relationships outside of session is so important, not only for us, but also for the groups we represent. And to be able to say, hey, I'm here on behalf of the realtors. They're like, oh yes, I know my realtors. And so there's like automatically this level of trust put into what I'm about to say on behalf of you. And then we can kind of like.
Yeah. And we won't talk about it today, but then we can go into a whole nother conversation about how to use the TNPC program and all of that. But the last thing I do want to end with is we really try hard to stay in our lane when it comes to the topics that we have you talking about. We don't venture off into things that we're not experts in. And I would ask you both, how important is it that we do that we have you only talking about private property rights and about real estate issues representing our organization?
I think it's so important. So, that statement I just made about they know their realtors and they trust them because they know that you know the industry and that's what you do. And you're that voice. And so if we talk about slaughterhouses, and if we had gone in there and say, we oppose the slaughtering of animals, but why? Like,
what does that have to do with real estate?
But why? And we only talked in that issue about the property rights stuff that was involved because that's what we do as a group, and that's what gains you respect as a group. If you become too broad and take on other issues, you're weakening your voice for the consumer and for the industry. And so I think that it's really important.
Yeah, I think Addison and I both start off every meeting we have with legislators saying, I'm here on behalf of. And I think by letting the legislator know, okay, I'm here on behalf of the Tennessee Realtors, they can instantly know, okay, well, I know who the Realtors are. I know what they stand for. So I kind of know where this conversation is going to be focused on, right? And so then it's important for us to stay on those messages. Because at the end of the day, the association and us as lobbyists for the association, we're the voice of the real estate industry. And so it's important that our voice stays where our voice knows the subject. I think, like you said, if we start venturing onto topics that aren't real estate, it really does kind of draw into question when we start talking about actual real estate issues, because they kind of, the motives of that messaging will begin to get questioned. So it's always important for us. Like I said, we start every meeting off who we're there on behalf of. And that's just legislators know us, obviously, amongst different clients. But we want them to know which client we're there on. And it's good because they know that client name and they have a sense of, okay, I know what we're going to talk about today.
And also, not only saying who we're there on and then saying our position, but the why. So if we go in and we talk about we're against impact fees, the why isn't because we don't like taxes. The why is because it has a negative effect on the cost of housing. If they're proposing a tax on electric vehicles, that doesn't have anything to do with what we do. And so, we're not just like an anti-tax think tank. We're an anti-tax on housing.
And have the data to show how it will impact. Right. Well, obviously, the work that has been done with you, with the Governmental Affairs Committee, with the RPAC Committee, it has the backing to show the difference it's making in our state when it comes to private property rights, housing, the real estate industry. And I say keep up the good work because it has been phenomenal, the headway we've been able to make. You're never going to win them all, but I think that we are very fortunate to live in Tennessee, and under the conditions that we are in, we are doing really good work. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for all that. I think there's so much more we could talk about, but we would be here for several hours, I think. So we will definitely have you guys come back and finish the conversation and talk about those TNPCs, talk about RPAC more, and talk about other things we see for the future, because it's probably going to be an exciting year next year too.
Definitely. I mean, I think that we're heading into election season, which is always interesting.
Fun to talk about.
A lot to talk about, and some leadership changes at the state level. So I think that kind of heading into a new day next year.
We'll definitely have you guys back and kind of get that recap. Great. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you all for joining us today on the RealTea podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Then visit tnrealtors.com to submit your questions and topics for future episodes of the RealTea podcast. Thanks for listening.